I do not know why I woke up at that moment. Maybe it was the wind blowing through the crack in the door or the sound of quiet footsteps in the hallway. But then, in the middle of the stillness of the night, I heard every word, every syllable like knives stabbing into my heart. "My dad is disgusting," said Michael, the voice of the same son I had raised with these calloused hands, and a lifetime of sacrifices. He said it in a low voice, but clear enough for me to understand everything. In the room next door, I heard his wife voice, a young woman voice, cold as ice. "Lower your voice, he is going to hear you. It does not matter, he does not even notice he is old." And then they both laughed, a dry laugh like dust. I remained motionless, not breathing, as if the slightest movement could break something inside my chest. I thought I had already gotten used to the silence of old age, but that night the silence was no longer peace, but an abyss. I closed my eyes, trying to pretend I had not heard anything, as if it had all been a dream. But no. Each of the words, "he is disgusting," kept echoing clear, as if branded into my bones with fire. I opened my eyes and looked at the ceiling. The light from the hallway filtered under the door, creating a thin and trembling line of light. I saw my hand on my chest, thin with marked veins, and yet it weighed like a rock. I had endured many things in my life, hunger, poverty, the sleepless nights when my wife left, but I had never known a pain like this being a cause of disgust for my own son. I did not cry. At my 78 years, my tears seemed to have dried up. I just felt a lump in my throat, as if an invisible hand were squeezing it. I listened as their laughter faded until it disappeared. In the house, only the regular ticking of the clock remained, and my own breathing heavy, hoarse. I turned to look at the photograph on the nightstand, the photo of Linda, my wife who had left me too soon. I whispered in the dark. "Do you hear it?" Our son just said. "I disgust him." The wind blew through the curtains, making the photo vibrate slightly. I wondered if, had she still been alive, things would have been different. Maybe not, because sometimes, even if you give everything, people change. I stayed in bed until the sky began to clear. I could not sleep a wink. Every minute that passed was a small stab in my memories. I thought about the past years, about the little 5-year-old Michael running after me to the door, holding onto my shirt and saying, "Daddy, do not go." Where was that boy? I did not know. Maybe he had died a long time ago, buried next to the days I thought were happy. Outside, the birds started to sing. I got up, put on a jacket, and went to the kitchen to make coffee, like every morning. I kept my old habits, but inside, everything was different. When the water boiled, the steam hit my face, and I looked at my hands. They trembled slightly, not from age, but because I knew that from that moment on, nothing would ever be the same again. And I whispered low enough so only I could hear myself. If a son feels disgust when looking at his father, maybe it is time for the father to look at himself. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and tell us where you are listening from in the comments below. My name is Arthur Robinson, 78 years old, born in a small town in West Texas where the land is dry, the wind kicks up dust, and people learn to grow with their hands and not with words. My family was so poor that the wooden bed was the only thing that survived the leaks of every rainy season. I finished elementary school and left it because my father died young and my mother had to wash other people's clothes to feed 4 children. I started working in construction at 14 when they still called me Slim. I pushed wheelbarrows of sand mixed cement, learned to endure the heat and the pain. But it was there amid the roar of hammers and the smell of lime where I learned one thing. A man must support himself with his own hands without waiting for anyone to rescue him. I worked tirelessly every dollar earned with the sweat of my brow. At 26, I married Linda, the girl who sold flowers at the market, the one with the sad dark eyes, but who always smiled. We had 2 children, Michael and Sarah. The day they were born, I felt my life light up as if heaven owed me some happiness, and had finally decided to pay me. But life is never fair for long. Linda died young, a fever an afternoon, with no time for goodbyes. Standing by her bedside, watching my 2 little ones hug and cry, I understood that from that moment on I would be father and mother at the same time. I was not rich, but I never let my children go hungry. I got up every day before dawn, made black coffee, ate a piece of dry toast, and went to the construction site. Coming back in the afternoon, no matter how tired I was, I tried to read them a few pages from some storybook. I do not remember all the nights I spent mending Michael clothes, or the times I stayed up taking care of Sarah when she had a fever. I only remember the smell of their hair, the scent of cheap soap, and a thank you daddy so low that only I could hear. That was what made me believe that all the effort was worth it. I felt proud seeing Michael go to a good college with a clean uniform and polished shoes. I bragged about him to my coworkers, telling them that he will be an engineer, not a bricklayer like me. I sold my only motorcycle to pay for his last year of college, and I still remember his graduation day. I was standing at the end of the row of seats, with my back soaked in sweat, but with a smile that would not fade. That was the day I believed all my sacrifices had been rewarded. And Sarah, my younger daughter, sweet, and of few words, so much like her mother. She always said, "Dad, you are the strongest man in the world." I laughed and answered her that I was just a man who knew how to endure. Years later, when work improved, I managed to open a small hardware store. It was not big, but it allowed me to hire someone and spend more time with my kids. I was able to buy my first house, the same one Michael would later call the old palace. For me, it was not just a roof, but every brick of my entire life. Remembering all that does not bring me pride, only sadness, because it turned out that everything I worked so hard to build, I had given to someone who now looked at me with contempt. I gave the love of a lifetime to someone who did not know how to return it. Sitting by the window, listening to the noise of the cars on the street, suddenly, I thought maybe it was because I loved him too much that he forgot how to love back. Since that morning, I started seeing everything in the house with different eyes. Nothing had really changed. It was still the same old kitchen, the cream-colored walls, with the paint peeling a bit the cactus on the porch that bloomed every morning, but I felt a coldness that seeped into every corner. It did not come from the wind, but from the attitude of the people. Michael got up late as always. He came into the kitchen, threw me a fleeting glance, and asked reluctantly, "Did you sleep well?" "Dad," I nodded, smiling as if I had not heard anything the night before. I poured him a cup of coffee with a steady hand. "Good son, very good." He thanked me. He took a sip and concentrated on his phone. Not another word. Between us only the sound of the spoon against the cup, rhythmic and strange. I looked at his hand. Long fingers clean, without calluses, without traces of metal, nothing like mine. Suddenly I thought that maybe that was why he saw me as dirty, rough, disgusting. That thought was like a pin, small, but stuck right in the place that hurt. At noon he worked in the living room, his laptop open, headphones on his voice, sounding firm and determined. He was calling someone, probably a colleague. I passed by there by chance and heard a few words. "Yes, he still lives with me. You know, old Slow, I do not want him to fall in the middle of the living room." And then a laugh. I stopped for a second. And then I kept walking in silence towards the garden where I myself had planted every rose bush now with withered leaves from lack of care. I sat on the stone bench looking at the house I had built with all my strength, and for the first time in many years I no longer felt it as my home. It seemed like a cage. During the whole afternoon I barely spoke. I did the usual, watered the plants, cleaned the table, tidied the kitchen, but inside something was burning on a slow fire. It was not rage, but a desolate sadness, that of someone who realizes he is nothing more than an object in his own house. At nightfall, Michael had dinner with his wife. They spoke in whispers, laughing every now and then. I was sitting at the other end of the table in silence. They did not notice my presence. After a while, my daughter-in-law got up and cleared the plates, while Michael said loudly, "Dad, do not get up. I will do it." But I knew it was just an empty gesture of courtesy. I nodded and cleared my own. Passing by the living room, I heard them whisper, "He stays quiet all day. It is better this way. I went back to my room and closed the door. The room was in semi-darkness. Only the ticking of the clock could be heard. I sat on the edge of the bed, looking at my old shoes placed neatly on the floor. Those shoes had accompanied me for 10 years. They had stepped on thousands of yards of dirt. They had walked through countless construction sites. I bent down and dusted them off carefully. In that moment, I felt I was the last one who still remembered the past. That night, I did not sleep either. I sat by the window listening to the whistling of the wind between the bars, thinking of Linda of the days when I held little Michael in my arms. I asked myself, did I spoil him too much, to the point that he forgot what gratitude is? And then I understood. It is not time that distances people, but the silence between two hearts, when one no longer wants to listen, and the other does not dare to speak. I sighed and drank a sip of the cold coffee that was on the table. In the mirror, my reflection returned a tired look, but more lucid than ever. I knew that if I stayed in silence, sooner or later, I would disappear completely, even if I continued living in my own house. And from there, a small idea, clear and serene, began to germinate in me. It was time to leave. The next morning, I got up earlier than usual, an old habit. Make coffee, open the door so the wind comes in, listen to the city waking up. But this time the aroma of the coffee was not as intense as before, maybe because my heart had grown cold. I looked around the kitchen. Every object, every little corner, I had bought it. This wooden table I built myself. That cabinet I painted with my own hands. But Michael never saw the paint stains on my hands back then. For him, everything was already there. While I was tidying up, I opened a closet looking for some papers. By chance, I found an old box lined with blue fabric. At noon, Michael came home to eat. He talked on the phone throughout the meal, typing on his laptop without looking at me. I was sitting opposite in silence, listening to every yes, no, sure, and then a we will talk later. When he hung up, I asked him in a low voice, "How was work today, son, normal dad?" "I am very busy. Do not worry about those things," he answered without looking up. I looked at his face, that of a grown man, a stranger with no trace of the boy who used to run to the door to wait for me when I came back from work. I remembered the times I had sacrificed for him. The day he lost his job, I sold a small plot of land on the outskirts to pay his tax debts. Another time, I gave him the only truck from my company so he could start his own business. I even remembered the night I spent awake, preparing a business plan for him to present, because he told me, "Dad, you have more experience." In that moment, I felt happy helping my son. I did not know that each of those acts was slowly turning me into a shadow, making him believe his father would always be there to fix his mistakes, regardless of whether they were right or wrong. Now all that was just footprints in the memory of an old man. I looked at my hands, the fingers that had built a house, that had cradled a son, and that now only trembled holding a cup of coffee. I exhaled very softly, as if letting go of a part of the past. In the afternoon, I tidied my room. Every object had its own story. The desk where Sarah wrote her diary, the pillow Linda had sewn. I walked through every room as if saying goodbye to everything. Stopping in front of our wedding photo, now faded, I whispered, "Linda, I have done everything I could. Maybe it is time to learn to let go." I sat on the bed, took a small notebook, and wrote a few lines. Affection, when not valued, becomes a burden. Maybe the most merciful thing I can do for my son now is disappear from his life. I closed the notebook and looked out the window where the afternoon light was fading. In that instant, I did not feel rage nor fear. Only a lightness in my heart, that of someone who finally accepts the truth. At nightfall, I sat on the porch, listening to the wind whisper among the leaves. The smell of damp earth and wood smoke floated in the air. In the distance, the sound of a car faded away. I closed my eyes and told myself, "Soon, Linda, I will leave in silence like the shadow no one notices when it abandons the house it once built." I did not tell anyone what I had heard. nor did I say a single word to Michael. I kept silent like someone who guards a wound in the chest, not touching it, so it does not bleed. But the more I tried to repress it, the clearer the pain became. The following days I lived like a shadow. I did everything as always at the same time with the same routine. Make the coffee, sweep the patio water, the plants cook lunch. But my spirit was no longer there. One morning, while washing a cup, I saw my reflection in the water. Gray hair, tired eyes, and behind me the spacious house I once dreamed of having. I remembered that, as a young man, I believed that with a solid roof, my children would never go without that brick. Walls would protect love. I was wrong. I forgot that a home is where there's affection. Otherwise, it is just 4 empty walls. That afternoon, Michael came back late. He walked into the house, talking on the phone with the cold look of a stranger. I greeted him, and he nodded without looking at me. I stood still, listening to his bedroom door close. In that instant, something inside me broke slightly without noise, like the crack in a mirror. And in that fissure I saw a truth with clarity. Love between a father and a son can die in silence. That night, I took the small notebook I always used to write down work things and opened a new page. I wrote, "When a son no longer needs his father, one should not force oneself to stay to remind him. When love becomes a burden, leaving is also a form of kindness." I closed the notebook, put it in a drawer, and sat in silence for a long time. The room was in semi-darkness. Only the wind flapping the curtains could be heard. I thought of Linda. Sometimes I still talked to her as if she were close. "Linda," I called her in a low voice, "I have done everything I could. I raised our son to be a good man, but he no longer sees me." In the dark, the photo on the table vibrated slightly, and the yellowish light illuminated her face as if she nodded. The next day I started gathering my few belongings, not because I wanted to run away, but because I needed to put my soul in order to be able to leave. I gathered some clothes, some papers, a photo of Linda, and my father's old watch. Just enough for an old man seeking to find his peace again. In the afternoon, when Michael left the house, I walked through every room. The house was lit up, but it lacked warmth. I touched the walls, the small cracks I myself had filled with putty, and I thought in silence, "Maybe it is time." I did not feel rage nor resentment, nor did I feel like a failure. I just perceived one simple thing. It was the moment to recover my dignity. When a father realizes his son looks at him with contempt, he should not cling to that love, because it is no longer love. That night I did not sleep. I sat on the porch contemplating the moonlight on the tiles. A soft breeze brought the smell of wet earth. I took a deep breath and felt a strange calm. There were no more tears, only a serene determination. Leaving this place not to flee, but to start over. I whispered to the void, "Linda, I am going. This time it is not for work, but because I need to live the rest of my life as a person, not as a shadow in my own house." The next morning, when the sun was barely peeking over the rooftops, I opened the window, letting the wind enter with the damp smell of earth and the jasmine from the porch. The house was strangely silent. Only the dripping of the coffee and the beating of my heart could be heard rhythmic and heavy. I looked around, feeling like every object was watching me. The wooden chair I built with my hands, the old wardrobe, with the scratch Sarah made as a child, the stained wall I always promised to repaint. Everything breathed the past, but it no longer belonged to me. I poured coffee into a cup with a slight tremor in my hand. I thought about that night, about tomorrow, and everything that would come. Everything seemed already organized inside me, without haste, without fear. I have lived long enough to understand that the important decisions in life are usually born in silence. I took Linda's photo from the shelf. She was still smiling with the same kind look as always. I sat on a chair, placed the photo on my knees, and spoke to her in a low voice. "Linda, if you were here, maybe everything would be different. I am tired. I do not want to hate my son, but I do not know how to love him anymore. I gave him everything, and maybe that was what made him forget my worth. The wind from the patio moved the curtain gently, making the light dance on the photo frame. I felt Linda was listening to me in silence, as always, but in that silence there was empathy, not judgment. I still remembered clearly the day of her death. Michael was only 5, Sarah 3. I promised her before her altar that I would raise them to be good people. I kept my word, but I never imagined that at the end of my life, the only thing I did not manage to teach my son was to be grateful. That noon I went to the bank. Leaving the bank, I walked back home. On the way, I passed the old hardware store where I was a customer for many years. The owner, a gray-haired old man, looked at me surprised. "Mr. Robinson, how long has it been? How can I help you?" I smiled slightly. "I came to ask something simple. If I wanted to sell a house, do you know someone trustworthy?" He nodded and wrote down the number of an older real estate agent, someone trustworthy. I thanked him, and with the paper in my hand, I went out to the street. The wind hit my face, but I felt lighter than ever. When I got home, Michael had not returned yet. I sat at the table, opened my notebook, and added a line. "It is not death that separates a father from a son, but indifference. When a father understands he is just an object in his house, he must find the door to leave on his own." I closed the notebook and put it in the drawer. In that moment, I did not feel like a loser, but like someone who had just woken up from a long dream. I got up and looked one more time at Linda photo. "You know I am not leaving for revenge. I am leaving to preserve what remains human in me, before my son takes that away too." I turned off the light, leaving the room in the pale light of dusk, and in that darkness I heard clearly the voice of my heart. It was time to go for real. Monday morning I woke up early as usual. On the porch the dew still shone on the leaves. The distant crowing of the neighbor rooster was an old custom I had heard for decades. But this time getting up, I knew today would be different. I put on the white shirt Linda liked so much, buttoning it carefully, and looked at myself in the mirror. In it I saw an old man with gray hair, sunken eyes, but with a back still straight. I looked at myself and said in a low voice, "Today, Arthur." We start again. I carried with me the paper with the real estate agent phone number. After calling an older man, voice deliberate and polite, answered, "Mr. Robinson." "What a pleasure. Tell me, how can I help you? I want to sell my house, but I want discretion." There was a silence for a few seconds on the other end, and then he answered, "Understood. Can we meet today? Sure, at 3. The meeting took place in a small coffee shop near downtown. The man named Mr. Henderson was around 60. He wore glasses and had a neat appearance. He listened to me without interrupting, without curiosity. When I told him the house had no debts or mortgages, and that it was solely in my name, his eyes shone with surprise. "And are you sure you want to sell it?" "It is a very nice property, Mr. Robinson." I nodded. My life was nicer when my family still looked at me with love. The house makes no sense anymore. We did the paperwork quickly. Henderson promised to find a discreet buyer without flashy advertising. I signed some papers. My hand did not tremble. When the ink dried, I felt as if an invisible rope had been cut, the one that tied me to the past. Walking back home in the afternoon, I went down the hallway, observing everything with a different look. Every brick, every door frame, the walls I had raised with my own hands, now seemed strange to me, as if they no longer belonged to me. I touched the wall and felt it cold, not because of the cement, but because the people heart had grown cold. At night, Michael arrived home and asked distractedly, "Dad, I had a long meeting today. Is there any coffee left?" "Yes, son, in the pot." I served him, watching him in silence. He did not notice that my look was different, nor did he see the real estate agent business card on the table next to an unmailed letter. After dinner, I sat on the porch, the street light casting a yellow glow on the tiles. I looked at my hands, the same ones that had built this house, that had cradled my son, and that were now about to sign to abandon it. I did not know whether to call it loss or liberation. I only knew that in my heart there was a void, neither heavy nor painful, simply silent. The next day, Henderson called to give me news. There was already an interested party. A foreign businessman wanted to buy it immediately, paying in cash. Everything happened so fast that even I was surprised. He told me, "It seems fate is in a hurry, Mr. Robinson." I smiled bitterly. Sometimes when one takes too long to decide, life decides for you. That night I wrote a few more lines in my notebook. A house can be lost, but dignity cannot. Once I built walls of cement, now I learned to rebuild myself with silence. When I finished writing, I heard Michael laughing while talking on the phone in his room. He was telling someone that house will be mine someday. I smiled slightly, without bitterness, without anger. The smile of someone who has already understood everything. I turned off the light and looked around one last time. The moonlight entered through the window, illuminating the familiar objects. I said in a low voice, "Linda, I am almost leaving. In this house there is no room for memories anymore, but I still remain, the memory still remains. And us, even if we are only the breath of the past, we will continue together, but in another place, a quieter place." 3 days later, the deal was closed. All the papers were signed on a foggy morning. Mr. Henderson shook my hand, his look full of respect. "Congratulations, Mr. Robinson. Everything is in order. The buyer pays in cash, and the transfer is made today." I nodded and thanked him. I felt neither joy nor regret, only the feeling of having fulfilled one last duty to myself. Leaving the office, the midday light hit my face so bright I had to close my eyes. A chapter of my life had just closed as softly as the sound of a wooden door closing behind my back. I returned home in the afternoon to the house that was no longer mine. Everything remained the same, but I saw it differently. Every object, every wall seemed to say goodbye to me in silence. I walked down the hall, stopped before our wedding photo, and gently touched the dusty glass. "Linda, it is done." I managed to let go. I took my old canvas bag, folded my clothes, put in some papers. Linda photo, my father, old watch, and the small notebook, the only things I considered my true heritage. I stopped for a moment looking around the room. It was a strange sensation, as if leaving my own body but remaining conscious. I took out from the drawer the sheet of yellowed paper I had prepared. I rested the pen and wrote slowly, every letter, with care, without shaking. "Do not worry, son. You will not have to pretend any more. The one who embarrassed you is gone. Take care, Michael. I hope someday you understand that love is not inherited. It is earned." I folded the paper, put it in a yellow envelope, left it on the dining table, and placed a small stone on top so it would not blow away. I looked around one last time. The house was in silence. The afternoon light entered through the window, making the dust motes shine. I remembered the day I finished building this house. Michael was 10, Sarah 7, and Linda was still alive. That day we ate for the first time in a living room without doors. The wind came in smelling of fresh lime. I thought it was the beginning of a happy life. Who would have said it would be the place where the last years of my relationship with my son would close? I went out to the porch. I locked the door without looking back. On the street, people walked hurriedly. I dragged my suitcase slowly, listening to the sound of the wheels on the sidewalk. Every turn was a weight releasing from my heart. At the corner, I stopped and took a deep breath. In front of me was the bus stop. I took the first one going downtown. On the bus, I sat by the window and looked out. The city moved away, its lights reflected in the glass. I put my hand in my jacket pocket where I kept the transfer receipt, the proof that everything now belonged to me, and only to me. I got off at the last stop and took another bus to the airport. I had bought the ticket 2 days before. One way, no return to Phoenix. No one knew. No one asked. I sat in the waiting room watching people say goodbye with hurried hugs, while I only had my suitcase and a heart as light as a bird. When the plane took off, I looked out the window. The city became smaller and smaller until it disappeared. In that moment, I did not feel sadness, only a strange peace. As if for the first time in my life, I could breathe deeply. I closed my eyes softly and told myself, "Son, I am not leaving out of hate, but out of love, because there are loves that to keep them, you have to let them go." The flight landed in Phoenix at 9 at night, a strange city with a dry wind and smell of metal. I dragged my suitcase to a taxi and asked the driver to take me downtown. I did not have an exact address, I just knew that there were some small, cheap and quiet boarding houses there. We stopped in front of an old wooden sign with peeling paint. Hope Boarding House. The name seemed ironic to me, but maybe it was also a sign. I knocked on the door. An old woman of about 60 opened, looked me up and down, and then smiled kindly. "Looking for a room, sir, yes, small, but quiet." She nodded and guided me down a narrow hallway. My room was on the first floor. It was small, with beige walls, a bed, a table, and a window that overlooked an alley. I left the suitcase on the floor and took a deep breath. For the first time in many years, I was in a place without memories. That night, I did not turn on the light. I lay down listening to the noise of the cars on the street, the distant barking of a dog. In my mind, I heard Michael's voice again. My dad disgusts me. His laugh, my daughter-in-law laugh. I thought I would feel pain, but no, only tiredness. I said in a low voice in the dark, "Linda, I did it. I left." The next morning I got up early, opened the window, and a cold, clear light flooded the room. I made coffee in a small electric coffee maker. The aroma of the coffee mixed with the morning breeze, reminding me of so many past years. I did not know how to start over at my age, but at least I knew I would no longer have to listen to the sighs of someone who considered me a burden. My first morning I walked around the neighborhood. Phoenix was bustling. People went to work, buses crowded together, but I felt a strange peace. No one knew who I was. No one called me old. No one looked at me with pity. I bought a coffee and sat on a park bench, watching the children play. A boy fell and burst out laughing. His father bent down to pick him up, wiped off the dust, and hugged him. I looked at them and smiled slightly. Maybe I looked like that too in the past. At noon I went back to the room and took out my phone. 17 missed calls, all from Michael. A text message. "Dad, where are you? I do not understand what you did. You sold the house. Why, I read it without answering." A moment later the phone vibrated again. Another message, this time with a harsher tone. "What did you do? Old man? Are you crazy?" And then another with a trembling voice as if he were scared. "Dad, please answer me. Let us talk." I left the phone on the table. My heart did not beat as fast as I thought. I just felt a void, as if those words had arrived too late, when there was nothing left in me to answer. I wrapped the phone in a towel, turned it off, and put it in the suitcase. I knew that if I listened one more time, my will would falter. At night, I walked around the boarding house. The streetlights dyed the street a pale yellow, and the smell of freshly baked bread floated in the air. I heard some old men laughing in a grocery store, the music of a small bar, and I realized that although I was alone, I was still alive. I still had breath, I still had legs, and I still had the right to choose peace for myself. Back in my room, I wrote a few lines in my notebook. "Son, you will call, you will get angry, you will cry, and then you will forget, and I will start over. Because sometimes to keep love, you have to learn to walk away from it." I put down the pen and looked at the ceiling where the dim light filtered through the small window. The noise of the cars on the street faded away. I closed my eyes softly, and in that instant I felt my heart at peace. That rare peace I had sought all my life, but could only find when I lost everything. The first days in Phoenix passed slowly, but without heaviness. Every morning I woke up when the sky was still misty. I made a cup of black coffee and sat by the window to watch the light flood the street. I listened to the street vendors shouting the screech of the bus brakes, the voices of children calling their mothers. Those sounds, seemingly trivial, made me feel alive, even if no one knew my name or waited for me at home. One afternoon, while I was sitting on the small patio of the boarding house, an old man sat next to me, leaning on an old wooden cane. He had a square face, a bright look, and a sparse gray beard. He seemed like someone who had lived a lot. He spoke with a deep and slow voice, that of someone used to conversing with time. New here, right? Yes. I just arrived a few days ago. I am George. I live in room 7. I smiled. Arthur. A pleasure, George. We talked like two strangers finding a bit of warmth in the middle of a cold city. The afternoon fell. We stayed there without saying anything else. The wind seeped through the cracks in the walls, bringing the smell of dampness from the approaching rain. In that silence, suddenly I felt my heart calm down. It had been a long time since I talked to someone without having to give explanations, without having to prove anything. From that day on, George and I became friends. In the morning, he used to knock softly on my door. Coffee, old man, and I answered, always. We sat in a corner of the porch, each with his cup of coffee, watching the street wake up. People went to work. Students laughed. The sky cleared. And in that brief moment, I felt more at peace than ever. Sometimes we talked about our children, he said. Children are borrowed, Arthur. We raise them, feed them, but they do not belong to us. Some return, others get lost. I just nodded. There are truths that do not need to be discussed, only accepted. At night, I used to write in my notebook. Each page contained only a few lines, but it was the only way I had to preserve a part of me. Day 8 in Phoenix. I still do not get used to the loneliness, but I am no longer afraid of it. Here no one knows I'm someone's father, nor does anyone despise me for my age. I am just Arthur, and that is enough. One noon, while walking through a small market near the boarding house, I saw a group of children playing soccer under the sun. A boy fell and scraped his knee, bleeding a little. I approached quickly to help him up. He looked at me with his clear, dark eyes and smiled. Thank you, sir. I froze because in that smile I saw for an instant the Michael of my childhood. The same eyes, the same laugh before time and ambition turned him into another person. That night I went back to my room. I poured myself a cup of coffee and sat on a small wooden chair. The wind from the street entered light but penetrating. I said in a low voice, Linda, maybe I am still lucky, because in this strange place I have found a little warmth from people without blood ties, without strings attached. I drank a sip of coffee and added one more line in my notebook. Sometimes family is not where you are born, but where they listen to you, without judging you. And I realized that peace in reality is not in any place. It only comes when you stop expecting someone to understand you. One morning, while I was sitting with George on the porch drinking coffee, the landlady brought me a thick white envelope. For you, Mr. Robinson. It arrived a while ago, she said before leaving. I recognized the handwriting on the envelope. Neat, cold, with the name of a law firm. I had a bad feeling. I opened it and read every line slowly. By means of this letter, you are notified of the intention to challenge the sale of the property located in... I read it 3 times to understand it completely. Michael was suing me. He claimed that when signing the sales contract, I was not in full use of my mental faculties, meaning that I was senile, that I was not aware of my actions. I laughed not out loud, just a huff that sounded like the wind. I did not feel rage nor surprise, only relief, because I had already foreseen it. George looked at me and asked in a low voice, Is something wrong? I folded the paper and answered, Nothing I did not expect. It is my son, and he wants what is no longer his. He just shook his head and said slowly, When love does not teach respect, life takes charge. That afternoon I went to the bank. Mr. Lewis, the young advisor, recognized me immediately. I handed him a copy of the documents and said, I am going to need certified copies of all the movements and a medical certificate from my doctor, the one we left on file. He understood instantly and nodded. Legal problems, Mr. Robinson. No just truths that need to be put in writing. Before selling the house, I had done everything according to the law. I had a medical certificate confirming my total lucidity, a video of the signing before a notary, and even a statement I read myself clear and articulate. Everything was on file. I was not worried. The next day I called the law firm listed on the envelope. When the secretary answered, I said calmly, "This is Arthur Robinson. Tell the lawyer that his client, my son Michael, can forget about this lawsuit. If he insists, I will have to show evidence that will make him embarrassed in front of a judge." She kept silent for a few seconds, and then just said, "I will convey it to him, sir." I hung up. In the room, the afternoon light entered obliquely through the window, illuminating the still steaming cup of coffee. I laughed alone, not for the victory, but because I realized that for the first time in my life, I had learned to defend myself without needing to shout. 3 days later, there were no more letters or calls, but one night, turning on the phone to see the news, the screen blinked. 20 new messages. Michael. I opened one. It was his voice, hoarse, tired, Dad. I did not know you had done all that. I did not think you would leave like that. About the disgust. It was nonsense. Sorry. Come back, please. I listened to the end and turned off the phone. I did not cry. I just stood still looking out the window at the blinking lights of the city. I thought of George's words. There are wounds that do not heal with justice, but with distance. I added one more line in my notebook. Son, there are apologies that do not need to be heard, because when a father heart has grown cold, only silence remains, and silence is also an answer. Then I closed the notebook and poured myself more coffee. Outside, the night in Phoenix was so silent you could hear the slight whisper of the wind on the rooftops. For the first time in many years, I felt truly firm, not for having defeated anyone, but because I had finally chosen peace for myself. A week later, I was sitting on the porch of the boarding house, writing a few lines in my notebook, when the old phone vibrated softly. It had been off for a long time, but that day I do not know why I turned it on to check the time. An unknown number appeared on the screen. I was going to ignore it, but a feeling stopped my hand. I answered. Dad, I froze. That voice, sweet and trembling, I could not be mistaken. It was Sarah, my daughter. Dad, are you there? It took me a few seconds to find my own voice. Yes, honey, I am here. There was a long silence between us, one of those silences that can only exist between two people who have been separated for a long time, but still love each other. Then she broke down crying. It was so hard to find you. No one knew where you were. Michael did not want to say anything. He just told us you had sold the house and disappeared. I asked slowly with a calm voice. And did he tell you why I did it? He said you had a crisis, that you were not well anymore. I smiled slightly. Of course, it is easier to say that than accept the truth. Sarah kept silent. Then she said with a broken voice, Dad, I did not know anything, I swear, but I suspected. He has not been the same for a while. He became arrogant, cold. I know, honey. You do not have to explain it. I heard a sigh on the other end of the line, and in her voice I perceived something I had not heard in Michael for a long time. Sincerity. Sarah continued with a lower but firm tone. Dad, I want to see you. I need to hug you. Leo asks for you all the time. That name made my heart stop. Leo, my grandson, Sarah's son. I remembered he was born on a rainy day, and I held him in my arms, so small, smelling of milk. I hesitated. Part of me wanted to see my daughter again, but another feared everything would get complicated again. I was afraid of hearing more excuses, seeing looks of pity. But Sarah's voice softened me. I am not asking you to come back, Dad. I just want to see you. Look you in the eyes and tell you, thank you for still being alive. I sighed. All right, honey, but come alone. Yes, Dad. I promise it will be just me. 3 days later, I waited for her at the bus stop near the boarding house. A taxi stopped. Sarah got out. She had not changed much, only her look was more mature. And there was something of Linda in her, a soft and silent sadness. When she saw me, she bit her lip and ran towards me. Dad, she hugged me tight. It was a long, trembling hug, as if she wanted to repair all the broken years. I said nothing. I just put my hand on her back and patted her. We sat in a small, nearby coffee shop. Sarah took a box of sweetbread out of her bag. I made it like the ones you liked. I smiled and tasted a piece. The sweet and spicy taste of cinnamon spread through my mouth, bringing with it distant memories. She told me many things. About her work, about Leo, about how she missed her mother, about the years she kept silent for fear of Michael. I listened, without blaming her. When she stopped, I told her, "Daughter, do not blame yourself. Everyone carries their story. Yours, at least, still has tenderness." She looked at me with damp eyes. "Dad, can I come see you more often?" I nodded, smiling. "Always, honey. This door, although humble, will always be open for you." That afternoon, when Sarah left, I stayed alone in my small room. On the table was the box of bread, half eaten. I cut a piece, drank a sip of coffee, and looked out the window. Outside, the sunset was falling, dyeing the sky a fiery red. I wrote in my notebook, "Sometimes love does not come from someone new, but returns through those you thought lost." Sarah has brought back Linda warmth, and maybe thanks to that, I will learn to love again without fear of being hurt. A week after our first meeting, Sarah called again. Her voice was light and enthusiastic, like a little girl. "Dad, Saturday, I am coming with someone who wants to meet you." I smiled, guessing immediately. "Leo." "Yes, he says he wants to see his Grandpa Arthur." Saturday morning, the sky was clear. I got up early, tidied the room, cleaned the table, and set 2 cups of coffee and a glass of milk. I do not know why, but my hands trembled a little, as if I were about to meet something I had lost a long time ago. When the taxi stopped in front of the boarding house, I went out. Sarah opened the car door, and a boy of about 8 poked his head out with bright dark eyes. "You are my Grandpa, Arthur, right? Yes, son." "I am." He smiled and handed me a small ball. "Will you play with me after breakfast?" I nodded with a lump in my throat that prevented me from speaking. The 3 of us sat in the small room. Sarah had brought sweetbread, and the aroma of flour and cinnamon flooded everything. Leo talked to me about his school, the neighbor dog, that he wanted to learn to play the guitar. I listened and smiled. Every time he said Grandpa, I felt like a piece of my heart was being repaired. After breakfast, we went to a nearby park. I sat on a stone bench watching him play soccer, laughing out loud. A soft breeze blew, lifting the dry leaves. In that moment, I remembered Michael when he was little. The same bright eyes, the same laugh. A shadow of sadness grazed me, but then I told myself, not all children grow up to forget love. Leo ran towards me and dropped down next to me, breathless. "Grandpa, Mom says you make the best coffee in the world." I burst out laughing. "It could be, but only when there is good company." He looked up, tilting his head. "And why didn't you live with us?" "Mom said you were traveling." I looked into his clear eyes. I could not lie to him, but I could not tell him the whole truth either. Sometimes adults also need to find their place, son. He stayed silent for a moment and then nodded. "And now you found it? I think so." He smiled and suddenly hugged me. A small, warm, and sincere hug. At nightfall, Sarah said it was time to go. Leo did not want to. He grabbed my hand tightly. "Can I come back, Grandpa?" "Sure, whenever you want." When they were out of sight, I stayed at the door for a good while, watching the dusty street. On the bench, his small ball had remained. I picked it up, dusted it off, and placed it next to the window. That night, I did not sleep. I sat down to write in my notebook with trembling but firm handwriting. Today they called me Grandpa again. Sometimes life takes a son and gives you back a grandson as a way to remind you that love does not die. It just changes form. I closed the notebook, listening to the wind outside. I no longer felt alone. In my heart, a small spring had just begun. Since Sarah and Leo found me, my life acquired a new rhythm. Saturday afternoons no longer passed in prolonged silence. They arrived, bringing with them laughter, the smell of sweet bread, and the scent of soap from a child's hair. Leo used to run around the small patio, laughing out loud while I, sitting in a chair, watched mother and son as if I were seeing a part of my lost life return to me. One day, George suggested I go with him to the community center. He said they organized meetings for seniors. They played chess, told stories, shared life experiences. I hesitated. It had been a long time since I was in a crowd, and part of me still feared people would see an old man abandoned by a son. But George said, "Sometimes when you tell your story, you lend courage to another who still does not dare to speak." I thought about it all night and finally accepted. That afternoon, I put on my oldest shirt, took my notebook, and entered a small meeting room. There were more than 20 people of different ages sitting around a round table. They told stories about old age, about children living far away, about loneliness. Some laughed, others cried. When my turn came, I stood up, hands trembling slightly. "My name is Arthur Robinson," I began with a hoarse voice, "and I sold my house because I heard my son say I disgust him." The room went silent. I could hear the slight creak of a wooden chair. I told my story without haste, without drama, like someone pulling thorns from the heart. I spoke of my life, of work, of Linda, of Michael, of the night I heard those words, and of my decision to leave in silence. With every sentence, I felt like the wind blew over an old wound, stinging, but at the same time drying it. When I finished, no one said anything. A tiny old woman with completely white hair got up, hugged me, and said in a low voice, "Thank you, Mr. Robinson. You said what many of us feel and keep quiet." And then the whole room applauded. It was not a loud applause, but soft, sincere. In that moment, I realized I was not alone. I was not the only one forgotten by his children. There were so many old people like me sitting in the darkness of their old houses, wishing someone would listen to them at least once. At night, coming back, I sat at the door and wrote in my notebook. Today I spoke with a trembling voice, but with my heart in my hand. I did not tell my story to get pity, but to remind those who keep silent that loving is not enduring, and that respect is the only debt children should never forget. I closed the notebook, listening to the distant sound of cars on the street. My heart did not weigh so much anymore. I knew I had done the right thing, not confronting my son, but standing up for myself. That night, the wind on the porch blew as soft as Linda's hand caressing my hair. I smiled, drank a sip of coffee, and thought, maybe I have finally learned to speak without needing to shout. And in the whisper of the wind, I seemed to hear an answer. That is how a heart heals Arthur, speaking with dignity. Time passed, and Phoenix became little by little my home. I acquired the habit of going in the morning to the market to buy bread in the afternoon, having coffee with George, and at night writing a few lines in my notebook before sleeping. Weekends, Sarah and Leo came to visit, bringing with them laughter, smell of cinnamon, and simple happiness. I thought my life had finally found peace, but life rarely remains silent for long. One afternoon, Sarah came alone. As soon as she entered, I saw the heaviness in her face. She left her bag on the table and sat in silence for a moment. "Dad, I have to tell you something, but promise me you will not get angry." I nodded slightly. "Tell me, honey." She took a deep breath. "It is Michael. He is bad. Very bad. They fired him from work." I kept silent. Sarah continued with a slow voice. "There was an audit. They found strange movements. He denies it, but everyone knows it was him. He is desperate." I looked out the window. The last light of day illuminated my hands, which trembled not from fear, but from pity. Pity for a son who did not know how to stop in time, I asked in a low voice. "And what do you think I should do?" Sarah lowered her head. "Nothing, Dad. I just wanted you to know. He did not ask me to come, but I know how he is. When he feels cornered, he attacks." I nodded, understanding immediately. Michael had always been like that. When he lost control, he looked for someone to blame, and usually that person was me. That night, I could not sleep. I went out to the porch and sat down to look at the starry sky of Phoenix. I remembered every stage of my life. The years of exhausting work to raise my children, the long nights with no company but the sound of the wind. I sighed. There are children we love with all our soul, but that love cannot save them, because they do not need love. They need consequences. The next day, George came to visit. I told him briefly about Michael. He listened and then said, "Do not carry it any more, Arthur. Parents teach, life corrects." That phrase echoed in my head all day. At night, I opened my notebook again and wrote, "I am not angry with my son, but I will not save him any more. Because if I keep holding out my hand, he will never learn to get up on his own. Sometimes kindness must also have limits." Sarah returned 2 days later. She said Michael was trying to contact me, asking her to give me a message. I just asked her, "Did he ask you to intervene?" "Yes, but I will not do it. I think he is finally hitting rock bottom." I looked at my daughter and took her hand. "Daughter, if he comes, do not open the door without thinking. A desperate man does not seek redemption, he seeks refuge." She nodded with red eyes. When she left, I stayed sitting in the dark with the yellow light of a lamp projected on the wall. It started to rain. Small, constant, sad drops. I did not pray for Michael to suffer, nor for him to be happy. I only prayed for him to see himself before it was too late. I said in a low voice to the night, "Linda, I am afraid this time he will knock on the door again, and I will have to learn to say no." 3 weeks later, what I feared happened. Early one morning, I received a letter from a lawyer I knew back home. I opened it. The handwriting was clear, and the first sentence squeezed my heart. "Your son, Michael Robinson, has attempted to use your name to guarantee an unpaid loan." I read it several times, feeling not rage, but a silent sadness. It turned out that even after disappearing, Michael was still trying to drag me into his chaos. I did not get angry. I just felt pity for a man who had lost even his honor without realizing it. I went to see Mr. Lewis at the bank in Phoenix. When he heard the story, his eyes widened with astonishment. I asked him to help me certify the documents, and then I contacted my old lawyer to file a complaint for identity theft. Everything was settled carefully, without noise, without hate, just a father defending his name for the last time. In the afternoon, coming back, I opened my notebook and wrote, "I saved my son so many times he came to believe he could not live without his father. But the truth is, precisely because I always saved him, he never learned to stand up by himself." The next day, I bought a small lemon tree and planted it in front of the door. Sarah asked me why a lemon tree and not a rose bush or flowers. I smiled. "Because the lemon hurts at first, but it heals wounds." She smiled slightly, understanding. I looked at the little tree. The wind moved its thin branches, its green leaves trembled. I whispered, "Every person must bloom for themselves, no matter how hard the season." That night, I kept writing. No one escapes the consequences of their own acts. But if we keep our heart serene, the consequences of others no longer have the power to hurt us. And when the night breeze entered through the window, I smiled slightly. I had learned something that took me 78 years to understand. Forgiving does not mean forgetting, but not allowing pain to control you. Another morning, Sarah knocked on the door, holding a brown envelope. "Dad, this arrived from the prison." I looked at my daughter, and then at the envelope. On it was clearly written the sender name, Michael Robinson. I kept silent a few seconds before opening it. Inside was a folded sheet of paper. The handwriting was shaky but familiar. "Dad, I have no way to justify what I did, what I said. I failed you. I humiliated you. And the worst, I never stopped to think if you were okay. The disgust I spoke of was not for you, it was for me. I do not expect you to forgive me. I just wanted to tell you I understood. Late, but I understood." I finished reading. I folded the letter and did not cry. I just looked out the window where the first light of morning illuminated the small lemon tree on the porch. The leaves moved gently, and a drop of dew fell to the earth. I knew they were not my tears, but the tears of life falling just when they should fall. That night, I wrote in my notebook. Forgiving does not always mean opening the door again. There are people you can only forgive from a distance, so they find themselves again in the dark. I kept Michael's letter in a drawer under Linda photo. See, he finally understood. Late, but understanding is better than nothing, and I felt my heart a little lighter, not from happiness, but because the end had taken shape. After all, I started thinking about the future, not mine, but Leo. I called Sarah and told her clearly, "Daughter, I want to open a college fund for the boy." She opened her eyes wide. "Really, Dad? Yes, I will not put it in your name or mine. It will be legal with a financial guardian, untouchable until he is 18. Sarah had teary eyes. "And if Michael finds out," I smiled slightly, "let him find out. I do not owe him explanations. I only owe the boy something better than silence." I went to the bank and did the paperwork. Every signature I traced with security, as if affirming before life that I still had the right to create something good. That night, coming back, I took out my notebook and wrote, "Once I built a house for my son, now I build a future for my grandson. A roof can be sold, but an example of a dignified life remains forever." Leo came to visit the next afternoon. He saw me taking care of the lemon tree and ran to help me water it. He looked up with a pure smile. "Grandpa, the lemon smells good." I ruffled his hair and said in a low voice, "Yes, son, it smells like new life." When Sarah and my grandson left, I stayed on the porch, contemplating the lemon tree shining under the sun. The wind brought a soft citrus aroma. I said in a low voice to myself, "Linda, I have done everything I could. Maybe this is the way a father loves, stopping saving his son to sow hope in his grandson." Then I wrote the last line of that day. "What is withered, let it fall. What is still green, let it grow." And I finally have learned to love without needing to hold on. One afternoon at the beginning of the rainy season, who knocked on my door was not Sarah nor George, but Michael's mother, the woman I had separated from decades ago. She was older than I remembered, with graying hair and an air of suffering. She did not look me directly in the eyes, just said, in a low voice, "I come on behalf of Michael." I invited her in and made coffee. The steam rose in the middle of a dense silence. After a while she took a folded paper out of her bag. "He asked me to give this to you. He is in a shelter in another state. He says he changed." I took the paper. I recognized the familiar handwriting and opened it carefully. "Dad, this time I am not writing to ask for anything. I just wanted to tell you. I understood, late, but I understood. I became the man I swore I would never be, and the worst I was, that with you. Today I know I no longer have the right to be in your life, but I want you to know that everything you taught me finally caught up with me. Wherever you are, I wish you peace. Thank you, Michael." I folded the paper, but this time I did not put it in the drawer. I left it on the table next to the cooling cup of coffee and looked towards the porch. The rain began to fall soft, constant, as if someone were reciting a poem in my heart. I did not know if Michael had really changed or if he only said it to get forgiveness. But that no longer mattered, because for the first time in each of his words, I did not see the shadow of arrogance, only his true self, tired, regretful, and naked. I said in a low voice, "Linda, do you hear it? He has finally learned to say sorry." A lightning bolt lit up the sky, reflecting on the photo on the wall. I drank a sip of coffee, and the bitter taste turned sweet. Maybe it was not because of the sugar, but because my heart had softened. I wrote in my notebook, "When the person who hurt you bows down, you do not need to step on them to win. It is enough to smile and let go. That is the answer of an adult before life." At night, I lit a small candle and placed it next to the letter. I did not pray, I just closed my eyes and whispered, "Your path is no longer parallel to mine, son, but I hope it leads you to a place where you learn what I forgot to teach you, gratitude." I let the candle burn until it consumed itself. As the light faded, I felt the past, the resentment, and the pain dissolve with the smoke. 2 years have passed since I left my old town. Phoenix has become the home of the rest of my life. The small room I rented is now mine. I bought it with part of the money left from the sale of my old house. I painted the walls myself. I planted more flowers. I built a low wooden fence and hung a double hammock under the lemon tree, which is now in bloom. In the morning, I wake up with the sunrise. I make coffee, listen to the birds singing, and my heart is as light as the wind. I do not need much, just a calm breath and a new day to live. Sarah keeps coming to visit me every week with Leo. The boy is already 10. He is taller, he is smart and polite. He helps me sweep the patio, pick up the fallen lemons, and then sits to listen to my old stories. One day he asked me, "Grandpa, why do you never get angry with my dad?" I smiled and looked at the blue sky, because I learned that anger does not correct it, only tires the soul. He nodded as if he understood. In the afternoons, Sarah and I drink coffee and talk about her work, about the small bakery that little by little is prospering. She smiles more. Her look is no longer as sad as the first day we met again. I look at my daughter, and a silent calm floods my heart. I lost a son, but life gave me back two beautiful souls, Sarah and Leo. One day, while the sunset was falling, I sat in the hammock and wrote the last lines in my old notebook. I used to think justice was making whoever hurt you suffer double. Now I understand that true justice is living in peace, without that person having the power to hurt you anymore. I closed the notebook and left it next to my cup of coffee. The wind brought the aroma of the lemon blossoms. I said, in a low voice, as if someone were listening to me. "Linda, I am finally home. Not in a house of bricks, but in the house of my own heart." I looked up at the sky. The last light of day slipped between the leaves and fell on my shoulders, like gold dust. Leo ran towards me, hugged me, and burst out laughing. "Grandpa, the tree already has fruit." I smiled and nodded. "Yes, son, and every fruit is a new life." I looked into the distance and told myself and all the parents who have ever been forgotten, if one day your son hurts, you do not let that pain kill the kindness in your heart, because dignity once preserved will bloom even in the earth that once was sterile. Then I sighed and closed my eyes softly. In that silence I heard the wind. Leo laughed the whisper of the leaves. Peace in the end was not far. It was right here in me, in my breath, and in a forgiveness that at last was complete.